everyone, it's Qualifiers. I'm fine, I'm alive. I'm coming off of an involuntary 3-week tech cleanse because my computer broke, it just got fixed. Pretty happy about that. But hello everybody, I'm back. So it's the start of a new school year, it's a transition time for me. I just finished a job at overnight camp, which is why I haven't posted a video in so long. And I thought it would be a good time to look back on some of the albums that shaped me when I was growing up, turned me into someone who loved music and who wanted to talk about it on the internet. And the first album I would like to talk about is Tyler, the Creator's Goblin. This was one of the first albums I got into when I got into rap in high school, and no one else I knew really listened to rap, and no one else I knew really understood why I loved this album so much, because outwardly, the album seemed so angry and foul-mouthed, and I wasn't like that at all. I wasn't particularly rebellious. I was a pretty good student, I was a pretty nice kid, I had a bunch of other friends who were similarly nerdy and similarly nice kids. No one really pegged me for a Tyler, the Creator fan. So in this review, I want to delve into Goblin, dissect it a little bit, and hopefully explain what the appeal of Goblin was to me as a teenager. And no, it wasn't that I secretly had a rebellious dark side. So let's go. Now, before we talk any more about Goblin, I think we have to talk a little bit about Bastard. 'Cause honestly, I'm surprised that Bastard was as controversial as it was. And it's not that the content on Bastard isn't shocking or inappropriate, because it totally is. There's tons of violence, there's tons of rape, there's a song told from the point of view of Ted Bundy. You can't really get more shock value than that. But it was pretty clear that Tyler on this album wasn't trying to be taken literally and wasn't even really trying to be taken that seriously. There's two ways that Bastard inserts its dark themes. One is as one-liners in the midst of other one-liners, which means you get like a mention of rape surrounded by cultural references and bad puns and references to other things which are maybe just as shocking but totally unrelated, which really makes you think that Tyler is just citing shocking stuff to cite shocking stuff, which is fine. That's kind of what rap has done for decades. Moreover, I think a lot of the horror here is used more in the way that genre films use horror, which is something that we as a society have come to understand. Everyone knows that if you're watching a sci-fi B-movie and there's, say, a rape and a murder, that movie isn't really going to delve into the true horror of that action. What it's being used for is to symbolize evil in a more general sense, to get the audience to feel like something bad has happened. It's almost a metaphor of sorts. But if some people still had trouble telling whether Tyler was serious or not on Bastard, Goblin pushed it even further, challenging listeners to figure out whether and how much they should take Tyler at his word. From track 1, it became pretty clear that Tyler's dark themes weren't just intended as shock value. Instead of framing the darkness within a narrative, it pinpoints the source of that darkness as Tyler himself. Over and over again, it frames this story as a personal one. It digs harder into the tone of songs like Bastard and Inglorious, which are already doing this to a certain extent, but while those songs framed the darkness as almost a brag or a joke or the object of little asides that you weren't sure whether or not to take seriously, Goblin really lingers on that darkness. In Bastard, a reference to Tyler cutting himself goes by so fast you might not even notice it, and even if you do, you're probably going to be distracted by all of the other things being referenced in the song. Murder, rape, pop culture, the things Tyler does when he's at his parents' house, it's all in there. Whereas when Tyler thinks about committing suicide on Goblin, the whole song kind of stops to question him, to interrogate what that really means. The first line is his therapist saying that he would never kill himself or anyone else because he doesn't even have the balls. Goblin is an album that presents itself as confessional and vulnerable. This is Tyler talking to his therapist. This is you getting an inside look at Tyler the Creator's brain. but it also goes out of its way to question the things that are coming out of Tyler's mouth, to make him into an unreliable narrator. And most of the self-questioning Tyler does comes from the character of Dr. TC. Now, at first, Dr. TC just seems like a framing device, a voice of an imaginary therapist, so that there's some context, some reason for why Tyler is talking about all of his problems. But as the album progresses, we find out that Dr. TC is actually just an imaginary voice in Tyler's head, an embodiment of his conscience, of the more practical, down-to-earth part of his brain. Dr. TC is a great reminder of how the foul-mouthed, unhinged, unstable version of Tyler, whose voice we hear all over this album, isn't really a full and accurate portrayal of Tyler the Creator himself. He's a persona. The real Tyler the Creator has a more reasonable voice in his head, urging him to make the right decisions, to be more responsible. It might not be that loud all the time, but it's there. So when Dr. TC suggests that Tyler might be trying too hard to please his fans, or exaggerating his problems to get attention, or just calling him out that he's never actually going to murder himself or anyone else, you're more inclined to take those things seriously, because Dr. TC isn't just some outside skeptic dismissing Tyler's problems and stereotyping him as a whiny teenager. He's a voice that comes directly from Tyler himself. And having that voice basically lets the audience know that everything on the album should be taken with a grain of salt. And I don't just mean that Tyler's audience should be skeptical about whether Tyler is going to go on a mass shooting spree. The answer is obviously no. I think most people understand that. But they should be careful in dissecting the album and identifying its themes, because it's really easy to misinterpret this album as being perhaps darker or more intense than it actually is. The idea that Tyler just wants attention, that he's just doing this for attention, is an idea that informs and influences and almost kind of infects the whole entire text of this album. Because if Tyler really is just doing this for attention, is he really being confessional, or is he just telling us a story that we want to hear? Is he commodifying the narrative of being depressive and angry? Is he trying to shock us, or is this actually who he is? In the album, there are so many instances of Tyler being concerned about how people view him, wanting to present himself as a certain way. Even going down to things that are as petty as worrying that critics don't take him seriously enough because he doesn't listen to that much classic hip-hop, to bigger concerns like that his white fans are stereotyping him, or that people think that he's a devil worshiper who's actually serious about the many dark things he puts in his lyrics. When you have a creator who's so obviously and openly worried about pleasing his fans, when he's saying things like how he feels so pressured to come up with an intro song that will be just as good and just as shocking as the intro to Bastard, it can be a little hard to take him seriously when he claims that he's going to kill all of his friends and then himself. It can feel like someone crying wolf to get attention. But Tyler knows this. If he didn't know this, why put in Dr. TC, a random framing device character who just appears to point out that Tyler might just be doing all of this for attention? And Tyler's knowledge of our knowledge is what I think makes Goblin a philosophically interesting album. Goblin is playing off the desire of certain people for a no-holds-barred confessional album where Tyler lays out all of his demons in excruciating detail. But instead, what it creates is kind of a Heisenberg effect of confessionality, where how confessional and true you think it is depends on how much you take into account your own presence as a listener. Is Tyler just trying to please you, to thrill his fans? Or is this some kind of deeper emotional truth? It's up to you to decide. And for a while, this is how I thought about Goblin, as a kind of performance art piece designed to get fans to rethink their relationship to creators. But the more I thought of this album as a big troll, the more I felt like that kind of undersold the emotional potency of it. Because when I listen to Goblin, I don't just think about stuff academically, I feel things. There is an emotional potency to the album that, instead of being undercut by the many times that Tyler implies he's doing this all for attention, is actually strengthened by that. Because here's the thing. Tyler spends so much time whining about and obsessing over and talking about his relationship with his fans, how he feels like he's not understood by them, how he wants to be understood by them, how he wants to live up to their standards, that his talk about connection and not being understood starts to seem less like a psychological mind game he's playing with us, and more like the actual emotional core of the album. And to me, that longing for connection, which comes through loneliness, is the real topic of Goblin. And I'd go even farther to say that a lot of the talk of suicide, of murder, of rape on this album is actually really just one extended metaphor for the loneliness of the main character. The main thing that makes me think that the topic of this album is loneliness is the way that dark things like suicide and murder are brought up on this album. Not as things in their own right that threaten Tyler, but as things that threaten him if he is not understood. It's the difficulty of communicating these things that's the problem, not the thoughts themselves. Like on the first track, where every time Tyler hints at or admits that his songs aren't really that literally dark, his therapist dismisses him as just wanting attention or trying too hard. Or on the last song, which has a moment straight out of 13 Reasons Why, when Tyler says he wouldn't have tried to commit suicide if people had just paid more attention to him and understood him. Now, to me, that doesn't really read so much as being seriously suicidal. If you have suicidal depression, you're gonna struggle with those thoughts no matter what. Yes, people being there helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. You're not cured if people pay attention to you more. And once you start reading this as an album primarily about loneliness, other things start to click into place. It starts to make total sense, for example, that Tyler would start shooting his friends at the end of the song Bitch Suck Dick, which is basically the song equivalent of a group hangout where there's some kind of really annoying or crass in-joke, which is really only funny because of the people who are in on the joke. Now, if you actually feel connected with those people, those kind of jokes can be funny, you can laugh along with them. But if you're already kind of alienated from that group of friends and what you really need and want is to be recognized as a unique individual, this interaction is going to make you feel terribly awkward, alienated, and just grate on your nerves. So does it make sense that Tyler shoots his friends at the end of Bitch Suck Dick? Completely. I kind of want to shoot Tyler's friends at the end of Bitch Suck Dick. I almost like to think of Tyler on this album as some kind of vigilante, overdramatic teenage superhero who, instead of fighting bad guys, fights loneliness by destroying awkward social interactions. Like, every time he's in, like, a weird party and he doesn't like it, he just shoots everyone. Now, all this being said, I kept thinking, what if all I'm doing is justifying a crappy macho coping mechanism? What if Tyler is really just like Eric Cartman on South Park, making everyone panic by threatening suicide when all he really wants is attention? Like, surely there must be a way of confronting and dealing with your loneliness that doesn't involve raising the specter of mass shootings. And yeah, I don't really think that criticism is entirely invalid, which is part of the reason I wanted to bring it up here. My inner Dr. TC certainly brought it up a lot when I was writing this review. But I also think that the violent imagery is a pretty natural product of Tyler wanting to be honest and genuine with us. It's not a front put on to try to get his problems taken more seriously. Instead, I think the violent imagery is baked into his own internal monologue. It's a part of how he deals with and copes with feelings of depression and loneliness and alienation. And sharing that monologue is what Tyler the Creator has always been all about. So this next part of the video is going to be a little bit less about Tyler himself and a little bit more about how he relates to his fans. And to start off, I'd like to begin with something that Louis C.K. said in one of his old comedy specials. He said something like, when he walks into his therapist's office and his therapist asks him something like, "Are you thinking of committing suicide?" he's put in a mental bind, because the answer to that question, seriously, is no, he's not really gonna commit suicide. That's not something he's seriously thinking about doing. But the answer literally is yes. It crosses his mind as a joke, or at the end of a hard day, or ironically, but he can't say that, because if he does, he'll be taken too literally, and therapists will be too concerned about him. But at the same time, if he's thinking about it, even if he's not seriously going to do it, isn't that worthy of a little bit of attention? Shouldn't that be something that he's able to share, able to talk about? Now, the reason I love this Louis C.K. bit is not just because it's a great example of how to be taken seriously without ever mistakenly being taken literally, but because it shows how walking that line helps you acknowledge and confront emotional issues you wouldn't otherwise be able to. People think crazy thoughts for a reason, and if you're thinking a lot about suicide or murder, even in a joking way, that's usually an indication that there's some kind of problem. One of the lines where I think that Tyler comments most insightfully on this dilemma of wanting to be taken seriously, but maybe not wanting to be taken literally at his word, is when he calls out critics who think he's actually a twisted or a violent person. He says, "Look, you got me. I'm not a rapist or a serial killer. I lied." And I think what's really insightful and kind of damning here is how Tyler paints himself into a corner. How, according to his critics, he can't just do what artists usually do. He can't use these ideas conceptually or ironically or fictionally. Because if he is literal, then he's twisted and violent and personally reprehensible. But if he's not serious, then he's crying wolf. He's co-opting others' pain and lying about things like whether he's going to commit suicide. There's no way for Tyler to acknowledge his problems on his own terms. There's no way for him to share his internal monologue where the violence is just kind of baked in. It's a part of who he is, without either being misinterpreted as being literal or being dismissed as not being serious enough. But the good news is, I don't think Tyler is alone in trying to pull off this balancing act between being serious and being literal. I think there's a whole genre of artists trying to do exactly the same thing. So to talk about where I think Goblin fits in the larger landscape of genres and rappers, I want to talk about a revelation I had while I was watching one of my favorite YouTube music critics, Todd in the Shadows. Now, it's a little bit of a tangent, so if you really are just interested in seeing me dissect Goblin and talk about Tyler the Creator as a figure, and aren't as interested in hearing vague comparisons between Tyler and other rappers or opinions about the rap landscape as a whole, I would skip to here. Otherwise, let's go. I was recently watching the Todd in the Shadows episode where he reviews the songs Lucid Dreams and Better Now, both of which are classified by many people as emo rap, and Todd makes an offhand comment that he wouldn't really consider either of them to be emo or to fit into that genre because they're not melodramatic enough. Emo is a genre that tends to intensify emotions, to take problems which objectively might not be that big and blow them up to the epic proportions to reflect what they actually feel like. Whereas what I think that Lucid Dreams and Better Now are going for is more depression music, more the numbing of feeling or making it so it feels like nothing matters. Emo is more about making it so everything matters, which is a long-winded way to say that I think that Tyler the Creator might be one of the first people to successfully pull off an emo rap album, because to me what Tyler is doing, trying really hard to be taken seriously but not literally, to share and embrace overdramatic thoughts which compare your own loneliness to murder and suicide. That is what emo is all about. It's about acknowledging that even your crazy melodramatic thoughts can have a kind of truth to them. Yeah, that truth is metaphorical, you don't literally want to kill your friends, but that doesn't mean you're not lonely. So yeah, if I had to fit Goblin into a genre, it would be emo rap. And if I had to compare Tyler's rapping to another medium, another form of art, it would actually be stand-up comedy. Stand-up comedians make dark jokes all the time, but it's a way for them to share some of their inner thoughts and to connect with the audience. When Louis C.K. makes that joke, it works because everyone in that audience has thought fleetingly or jokingly about suicide in the past. They just don't feel like it's okay to admit it. Tyler is sharing this stuff because, like a lot of comedians, he wants to be recognized and he wants to be liked, not just for the surface self that he presents to other people, but for all of the weird, crazy things that are actually happening in his brain. Part of his art is letting his fans and everyone know exactly who he is. Now, I mentioned earlier in this review that true authenticity from Tyler, and maybe from artists in general, seems impossible because they're always tweaking their own narratives to appeal to their fans. But maybe on Goblin, Tyler is actually giving us something better than an objective account of his own pain and his own problems. He's giving us a view into his brain of what his pain actually feels like, the metaphors he uses to describe it, and the moment-to-moment conflict between his desire to create a tidy narrative for himself and the desire to present things as complex and complicated as they actually are. And in a world which seems hellbent on only thinking confessions are valid when they somehow define you as a certain type of person, Tyler's complete disdain and contempt for all labels is actually kind of refreshing. I'm sure the internet would love it if Tyler went on Twitter tomorrow and tweeted out his sexual orientation and maybe a specific mental illness he's been diagnosed with, but I don't think he is ever going to. He's even cagey about whether or not he was diagnosed with ADHD. So the only way we can characterize Tyler is by distilling down all of the art that he's created, which is really hard to do. He's made everything from punk rock to R&B, from Cherry Bomb to Flower Boy. He demands that we define him by taking into account all of the weird, contradictory, impulsive things that go through his head, and that's kind of what I love about him. And now I want to go back to the question I asked at the beginning of this review, which is, why would Goblin appeal to someone who is not particularly rebellious, not particularly angry, just kind of a smart white girl living in the suburbs? And here's the answer. I was a pretty lonely teenager, and yeah, it wasn't an objectively big deal. I wasn't bullied, I had friends, but like a lot of teenagers, the loneliness felt like a big deal to me. I dealt with loneliness in a pretty similar way to Tyler, the Creator. I put all of my thoughts into art and hoped that people would read it and feel connected to me. And I'm 25. I'm not feeling that kind of desperate teenage loneliness anymore. But I'm still here putting my opinions out to the general public on YouTube. Not too far removed from what Tyler, the Creator, does, except it's a bit less polished and a lot less musically brilliant. But I hope you liked it, and I hoped you watched.
The shit I said to high school counselors haunts me, and I am not okay, boy. My name is Lonely, nice to meet you, here's my number.